possibile ascoltare in lingua italiana, inglese o spagnola. I remind you that it is possible to listen to this seminar in English, Spanish and Italian. There is a small globe at the bottom of the screen. If you need to change the language, you can. It's a pleasure to moderate this meeting today, and I thank all of you who are attending this event, as well as the organizers and the speakers, of course, for being here, some of you physically, to reflect on our critical theme. As we know, this is the final appointment of this series of 3 seminars that come as a contribution from the Holy See to the reflection that anticipates the UN Food Systems Summit in terms of ideas and testimonies on food justice in a post-COVID world. The series stems from the collaboration between the Secretariat of State of the Holy See, the permanent mission of the Holy See to FAO, IFAD and WFP, the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, and the Vatican COVID-19 Commission. During the previous meetings, the reflection focused on the role of women, who in many cultures are the very building blocks of food systems, and on employment and finance, which of course also have an impact on food in terms of production and distribution. And today our reflection begins on the topic of food in the service of life and integral human development. And it will continue with a second part more focused on food systems and conflict. I can only start by underlining how urgent these themes are. In 2020, the number of people affected by hunger globally has increased, even here in Rome and in wealthier countries, after years of decrease, as a result, among other causes, of the global health situation, of course, and conflict. This crisis is an even more compelling call to recognize how food is central to human integral development, but also how we can develop healthy food systems only by putting human beings from the farmer to the fork at the center. Of course, the theme will be examined this afternoon from a number of different directions and perspectives by our illustrious speakers. And before I pass the floor to them, this may be the best moment to underline how rooted the theme is in Christian life as an individual responsibility to feed the hungry, all the hungry, from the gospel, the time of the gospel when it was formed, when Jesus multiplied bread for the crowds that followed him, requiring that his disciples feed and give them something to eat, through the papacies to Pope Francis, and to his words in his encyclical Laudato Si. And we have a short video now that we'd like to show you on this very topic. So I'd ask our technical friends to send the video before we start with our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Una sola famiglia umana, cibo per tutti. Lo ricordiamo? Lo ripetiamo insieme? Una sola famiglia umana, cibo per tutti.
Quante madri e quanti padri ancora oggi vanno a dormire col tormento di non avere l'indomani pane a sufficienza per i propri figli? È urgente ora prendersi cura di chi ha fame di cibo e dignità, di chi non lavora e fatica ad andare avanti, e farlo in modo concreto. Come concreto è il pane che Gesù ci dà. Cultivar, nutrir, preservar. Padre, fa che per noi tutti oggi ci sia il pane necessario. e pane sia anche per acqua, medicine, cassa, lavoro. Chiedere il necessario per vivere.
Bene, bene. Eccoci di nuovo qui mentre ancora portano dei caffè, scusate. Però il caffè è utile a quest'ora a Roma. Coffee is very useful at this time of the day in Rome, because it's usually the time after lunch when people may have the habit of falling asleep. So it's a way to help us all to keep each other awake. So how many mothers and fathers, the Pope asked himself and asked us, ask themselves how to find food for their children? This is the underlying question also that helps us in our works today. And in this very respect, with these words and images in the forefront, I'm glad to introduce our first speaker this afternoon, Cardinal Peter Turkson, Prefect of the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. So I'd ask him to open this seminar today. I just note that the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen is at your disposal to offer comments and questions. And time permitting, we do have quite a busy schedule this afternoon, but we will try to include any possible questions so that the contributors may answer them, or issues that the contributors can answer. I thank you, and Cardinal Turkson, please, I pass you the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, moderator. Now, Your Excellencies, the distinguished panelists and all of you speakers, it's certainly a great pleasure and a great honor for me to join this event this afternoon on food conflict and the future of food systems, to mark the close of the Food for Life, Food Justice, and Food for All series of discussions. On behalf of the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, I would like to thank the Secretariat of State of the Holy See, the permanent mission of the Holy See to the FAO, to IFAD, and to the World Food Program, the Pontifical Academy of the Sciences, and all the partner organizations for helping to host this event. This indeed is a propitious occasion for the Holy See, not only to help widen the scope of reference of the conversation about food security and food justice, it is also an occasion to invite the Holy See to bring its moral authority to bear on the conversation for the question of hunger and access to food. It's a truly moral issue, as the past three popes have all variously observed. Hunger is not really new in the world. We either experience it or we know about it. We do not lack information and reminders about millions of impoverished human beings who lack nourishment for body, for mind, and the spirit. In fact, we are inundated by information about malnutrition, hunger, and starvation through reports, figures, and statistics by UN agencies, like here in Rome, the World Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, IFAD, and so on, as well as NGOs, academic and research units, and by the media, images of hungry men and women and children around the world. In two webinars on women and food, and on jobs, technology, and food justice, which the Dicastery prepared with the permanent mission of the Holy See to the FAO, IFAD, and the World Food Program, we had the privilege of listening to experts in the two areas from around the world, and representing different organizations, traditional wisdom, and faiths. They presented graphically with figures and images the scary and the disconcerting state of our global food system, and showed how local Caritas groups and humanitarian aid organizations help to shore up the deficiencies and the disparities in access to food through their food production and distribution network. They illustrated the observation of the Food and Agriculture Organization experts that global hunger has been on the rise for several years already. That in 2019, the number of malnourished or undernourished people in the world had increased by 60 million in relation to 2014. And this in spite of the increase in food production. They feared that even discounting the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, this trend will result in about 840 million hungry people in the world by 2030, far from the zero hunger objective contained in the Sustainable Development Goal number 2. And the pandemic very much worsens the situation for us all. So, dear friends, just as 3 T's, tierra, trabajo, and techo, express the need drivers of the popular movement organization organized by the Vatican and developing countries, so there are 3 C's, conflict, COVID-19, and climate change, which capture the key drivers of the food scarcity and hunger in the world today. Their combined devastating effect on all stages of food production and its supply chain are alarming. It is estimated that the pandemic alone will plunge 132 million people into undernourishment. And here, there's the possibility of bringing in adducing up-to-date evidence from South Africa, where a letter from the Nunciature announces that and calls for immediate help from the Holy See. Otherwise, a lot of families will not be able to go through the summer. So the threat of malnourishment and food scarcity is real, not to be reduced only to statistical figures. Indeed, behind every one of these numbers are people going to bed hungry, families who cannot bring food to the table, and children whose growth and development is stunted. As Pope Francis observed on the occasion of World Food Day in October 2020, for humanity, hunger is not only a tragedy, but it is also shameful. In fact, as he wrote in Fratelli Tutti, his encyclical letter of late, hunger is criminal, since food is an inalienable right. Pope Benedict XVI illustrated the point about the right to food in his encyclical Caritas in Veritate, saying that the right to food, like the right to water, has an important place within the pursuit of other rights, beginning with the fundamental right to life. It is therefore necessary to cultivate a public conscience that considers food and access to food a universal right for all without distinction or discrimination. So food insecurity, however, is not simply a lack of food. A series of interconnected factors which affect food production and distribution in all its stages underlie the crisis of food insecurity. They are economic, ecological, political, social, and cultural. Under culture, we may understand religious and also traditional values. Therefore, the crisis of food insecurity is a complex and a multifaceted issue whose challenges may be framed as follows. How can hunger be overcome? How can safe, affordable nutrition and sustainable food be ensured? How can farm workers and small farmers around the world live and work with dignity? How can rural communities, especially women, survive and thrive? How can land, water, and other elements of God's creation be preserved, protected, and used well in the service of the common good? And how do we respond to climate change in this regard? Accordingly, dear friends, the solution must recognize this complexity and seek to address it in all its dimensions. And therefore, food system in a post-COVID world, post-COVID-19 world, must be more robust, resilient, and sustainable. And reimagining and regenerating such robust food systems in a post-COVID-19 world require a holistic approach in the sense in which the integral ecology is presented in the encyclical letter Laudato Si. Every factor which is contributory to the crisis of food insecurity must be reckoned with, and nothing left to chance or considered as an independent variable. Everything is interconnected and interdependent: ecological, economic, political, cultural, and so on. Therefore, if, as Pope Francis observes, the violence present in our hearts, wounded by sin, is also reflected in the symptoms of sickness evident in the soil, in water, in the air, and all forms of life. And if, as Pope Benedict XVI also asserts, the way humanity treats the environment influences the way it treats itself, and so on, then, so that contemporary society needs to review its lifestyle, then the crisis of food insecurity is as much an anthropological issue as it is ecological, economic, political, and so on. Indeed, the peace of the world depends on how we deal with hunger in the world, as Pope Benedict again had a chance to note. The elimination of world hunger has also, in the global era, become a requirement for safeguarding the peace and the stability of this planet. And so, just as the Holy Father began this with a video taken from the World Expo in Milan in 2015, I'd like to add that when in 2015, Italy hosted the Food Expo in Milan, it mounted a campaign that called for a change in lifestyle through collective forces of our moral and spiritual energies to overcome hunger. The Expo encouraged support for local initiatives, which included cutting waste, maximizing land use for food production, help for women farmers, application of the fruits of scientific research in farming and food production, and making peace the really indispensable context for food production. But the greatest contribution of the Expo in 2015 to overcoming hunger lay in the theme of the Expo itself, which Pope Francis began his video clip with. The Expo had a theme, One Human Family, Food for All. And this was an appealing title. But simply converting the first part of this phrase into a precondition, a prior step, lets the title point prophetically towards the global goal of the Expo. And so, as the Vatican delegation had a way of doing this, it reread the title, One Human Family, Food for All, and so read that when we live as one family, there will be food for all. So we turned around that logo or that title of the Expo into a longer sentence, indicating that when we do live as one human family, there will indeed be food for all. In so doing, the Vatican delegation anticipated the creation of this encyclical on Fratelli Tutti, drawing attention to the serious anthropological character of the crisis of food insecurity. And so such a reading of the expo theme immediately turned global hunger into a human issue. Hunger comes from a lack of solidarity. Hunger comes from failing to feel, relate, and behave as a brother and a sister. And like every great human issue, global hunger immediately becomes a moral or ethical issue. It involves the exercise of human freedom. We are free to show disinterest or indifference. We're free to exercise goodwill. The church is no one. The choice is in no one's but our own. That is why in his video message in the opening ceremony of the expo, as we just heard or listened to, Pope Francis called for a change of mentality. So, dear friends, from the lessons of the 2015 Food Expo in Milan, we may now identify two fundamental principles to inspire and to guide action in ensuring food security for a post-COVID world. It is recognition for the dignity of each person and recognition for the common good. These two principles, when they guide our activity, will help us fashion and change our mentalities and embrace the challenges towards ensuring food security for all. And so, let us seek to reinforce local and global food supply chains, creating infrastructure, physical and digital, to close the gap between small-scale farmers and food markets. Let us elevate the needs of the most vulnerable communities in the world and bring them in the center of international political discussion like the one that is foreseen for the United Nations Food System Summit. Let us promote secular models of food production and consumption and an efficient use of resources, enhancing local and traditional knowledge to ensure better production and protection of natural resources. Let us reform the present-day technological and financial architectures to support the transformation of food systems. In particular today, in the context of the pandemic recovery plan, we have an unprecedented opportunity to respond to this and to mitigate the malicious mechanisms and the effects of all of this. And finally, let us change our behavior regarding food waste, which is deplorable in the extreme. And so, as we had a chance to observe in the last time, opening this synod in Food Expo in Milan, from which Pope Francis is speaking to us again, let us now recognize the paradox of abundance, having so much food and yet experiencing so much hunger and so much need, and through a change of lifestyle and mentality, have to bridge the gap between those who have and those who do not have, and so that food may reach the table of all. Thank you for your kind attention, and thank you for the rest of this meeting.
Grazie, Eminenza, grazie per le sue parole. Thank you for your words and for bringing into our reflection these elements from the papacy, from the words of Pope Benedict, from the words of Pope Francis and the recent encyclical Fratelli Tutti, which, as you underlined, came after the Expo in 2015, and that important sentence that you revisited, as if we are one human family, then there will be food for all. And in this respect, and with this in mind, I believe we can pass to our second speaker of today, and I would like to welcome and thank Mr. Dr. Ku Dong-yu for being here with us, the Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization, whom we are really grateful to welcome here at the Academy of Social Sciences, even only virtually, and we are pleased to listen to his words. Thank you, Director. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, moderator, and dear distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, or good morning, good evening, where you are, depends. The state of food security and nutrition in the world in 2017 had already warned us that together with climate-related shocks, conflict, and economic downturn were the cause of much of the increase in food insecurity. Data shows high levels of chronic acute food insecurity and nutrition in the countries affected by the conflict. Earlier this month, FAO and partners launched the 2021 edition of the Global Report on Food Crisis. The report confirmed an accelerating trend of rising acute food insecurity, where the conflict, economic crisis, extreme climate event continued to be the main drivers. In 2020, at least 155 million people experienced acute food insecurity at a crisis level or worse across the 55 countries and territories, an increase around 20 million people from the previous year. 2/3 of them, almost 100 million people, were pushed into acute food insecurity by conflict and natural disasters. Conflict and hunger are mutually reinforcing. We need to address them together to end this vicious cycle. To be clear, addressing hunger and poverty is the foundation for the stability and peace. FAO is an active member of the UN Secretary General's high-level task force on preventing famine in 2021, which seeks to do just that. This is indeed critical. And yet, it's more important than ever that we address the root causes of the rising level of acute food insecurity. Yes, we want to beat back the risk of the worst case situations in 2021, but we cannot find ourselves having to do so again next year or year after. The cycle must end. Ladies and gentlemen, outlook for 2021 beyond is grim. The COVID-19 pandemic has revealed the fragility of global agri-food systems. It highlighted the need of a more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agri-food systems. More than 1.5 billion people live in the countries affected by the pressing situations and the fragility. One of the greatest and most pressing challenges of our time is therefore to help those countries find a path towards lasting peace and sustainable development. Coherent actions are needed among the humanitarian, development, and peace actors to address the root causes of the acute food insecurity and poverty. At FAO, increasing the resilience and the inclusiveness of agriculture-based livelihood is a corporate priority. FAO's experience shows that the interventions that support livelihoods and food security have an important impact on the local peace, as they address not only the symptoms, but also the root causes of conflict. For example, instability has become the prominent feature in the Sahel, where the countries have been particularly hard hit by the acute food insecurity in 2020. Despite large-scale internationally backed efforts, peace remains fragile in many areas. This has been particularly the case for pastoral and agro-pastoral communities, whose livelihoods have been increasingly eroded in the Sahel and as well. In this region, livestock production contributes almost half of agricultural gross domestic products, and pastoralism represents one of the most valuable livelihood options in the dry land, contributing to social, economic, and environmental well-being. In many areas, the relationship between the farmers and the pastoral headers, which was once cooperative, has become confrontations as they seek to use the same scarce resources. FAO and other agencies are strengthening the resilience of this community with a focus on cross-border areas where the insecurity and fragility are particularly acute. Conflicts also cause the disruptions to production, processing, and distribution, which leads to food losses. Analysis has demonstrated the inverse correlation between the food production and the instance of the violence. Dear friends, the evidence is clear. While there is a widespread conflict, instability, there is a food insecurity, food loss, and less resilient agri-food systems. And hunger is often a contribute to the instability and the conflict. Multiple shocks are likely to continue pushing more people into acute food insecurity. Addressing food crisis requires a sufficient and well-targeted investment across the humanitarian development and access supporting peace. In addition to a sustained humanitarian response, we can reverse the trend of rising acute food insecurity and transform agri-food systems. Let's combine our efforts, seize the better future together. Here, I would salute the Vatican and all the friends there to support, build the world free from hunger and poverty. We can do together, and with a better production, better nutrition, a better environment, and a better life, with no one left behind. Food for all have food. Thank you. Over to you.
Grazie. Thank you, Director. Thank you very much. Thank you, Director. Thank you for your words. Thank you for your insight. And thank you, of course, also for the work that FAO carries out in many corners of the world and at many levels. Thank you for this insight on the places of frailty. And you touched them with your hands and with your words during your contribution at a global level. And for reminding us also of the connection that there is between food insecurity and conflict, which is something really that we will be examining throughout this afternoon. And now perhaps to enter the details of that cycle that you said must come to an end, I would like to pass the floor to Professor Stefano Zamagni, who is the president of the Pontifical Academy for Social Sciences. Professor Zamagni, thank you for being with us. And please,
thank you. Thank you so much, and many, many congratulations for such a relevant and important initiative. In the time I have at my disposal, I would like to focus on 4 specific points. First, as we know, food systems and the political framing of how they function are made up of complex networks of individuals and institutions. Depending on policies, food systems determine the availability, affordability, and nutritional quality of the food supply and influence the amount of and combination of foods that people are willing and able to consume. Conflicts regarding land, technology, natural resources, subsidies, and trade are all being played out in the food policy arena. Food systems should be inclusive, ensuring economic and social inclusion for all food system actors, including smallholder agricultural producers, with focus on women, indigenous peoples, and youth, who are often marginalized and vulnerable. An implication is that local agricultural production needs to become more diversified, and more value needs to be added to agricultural products through processing, trade, and packaging, which can also stimulate local economies and entrepreneurship. Diverse systems, such as crop diversity and diversity of production systems, respond better to shocks. For example, distributed agriculture with big and small farms is better than having just big farms. Dominant firms have become too big to feed humanity in a sustainable way, too big to operate on equitable terms with other food system sectors, and too big to drive the types of innovation we need. The analogy with the so-called too big to fail phenomenon in the banking sector comes to mind in this regard. Second, in recent times, food quality has been increasingly gaining importance both in research and public debate. One main reason is to be found in the extraordinary revival of the notion of consumer sovereignty. Consumers are no longer mere passive recipients of proposals coming from the production side. They want to buy more and more in a critical and responsible manner. As we know, this is a point that Caritas in Veritate 42-46 stressed already a few years ago. It follows that by actively taking purchase decisions, the consumers contributes to creating the supply of goods and services they purchase on the market. It is no longer sufficient to rely on the well-known value for money criterion. The consumer now wishes to know where a given specific good has been produced and whether the company in producing that good has violated or not values he or she deems of fundamental importance. Consider, for instance, the increasing number of cases in which consumer associations call for the boycotting of companies that violate workers' fundamental rights. The history of boycotting is very interesting because it was born in Ireland at the end of the 19th century. And it came out from the initiative of a Paris priest, a famous Paris priest. Now, it follows that a quality-based strategy, which takes into account the new economic scenario, must set as a starting point the strict interdependence between production and consumption and aim at fostering a self-catalytic process, thanks to which a gradual and improvement in the quality of supply brings along a gradual and equally growth in the quality and competence of demand. Third point, the pervasive reorientation in the economy towards finance has transformed also the agro-food system. Financial actors are increasingly investing in the food system and expecting good returns on their capital. This growing focus on financial profitability does not benefit everyone. And in some cases, it even comes into conflict with the purpose of food provision. Some financial products, such as derivatives, have been long-standing features of the sector. Items such as contracts that establish future prices of agricultural commodities to be sold at harvest, the so-called futures, have been popular since the 19th century. However, the financial deregulation that occurred in the last decades changed this situation drastically. In this context, agri-food commodities have been transformed into assets subject to financial trade and speculations, products that interest a large spectrum of investors and entities that are primarily used to increase shareholder value. The expanded role of finance is key to understanding the transformation currently taking place within the global food regimes. Hence, I believe that it is urgent to devote at least some attention to this new phenomenon, which is new in the sense that started occurring in the last few decades. Finally, a final point. Within the year 2050, almost 70% of the global population will live in megacities, where the demand for soil, water, food, and energy will increase considerably. A key problem is how to allow people living in these megacities to have access to food. Can we really tie food affordability to food sustainability? Urban metabolism is the notion today utilized for sustainability. It is based on the metaphor of the city as a living organism. As it is shown in a recent report by the MacArthur Foundation, cities will play a strategic role in the development of sustainable food systems and in the promotion of an adequate diet. It follows that urban food circularity urban food circularity is the priority if we want to move from an extractive to a regenerative model of development. To make this happen, we need a strong partnership and global conversations to work through the tough decisions and trade-offs we inevitably have to face. We need to learn from each other, since everyone is part of the food system, and everyone can join in taking action to create the change we need. I believe that the Food System Summit of this year, 2021, must represent a turning point in our effort to deliver the 2030 Agenda and SDG. Thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie a lei, professore. Thank you for your words, for bringing into our discussion today also the element of this economic and not only perspective that you provide. Thank you for explaining the need of innovation, for innovation that must come to the system, also in the light of what you explained as the rising trend of urbanization that is happening all around the world, and the need for this innovation to come from below, as a sense of responsibility that should pervade different levels, from farmers to consumers. So thank you very much for your words. And I would now like to pass the floor to Father Fabio Mussi of the Pontificio Istituto Missioni Estere, better known as PIME, who is the coordinator of Caritas in the Diocese of Yagoua in Cameroon. Father Fabio is connected with us today, but in order to guarantee that his contribution is not spoilt by the connection itself, I think we have a video contribution which we will broadcast now. But first of all, I'd like to greet Father Fabio, whom I see, and welcome him even at a distance here at this table in Rome. Salve Padre Fabio. E diamo a lei la parola tramite il contributo video che ci presenta.
Eminenze, eccellenze, illustri partecipanti a questo webinar. Nell'enciclica Laudato Si, Papa Francesco ci propone l'impegno personale e comunitario per prenderci cura della casa comune con gesti concreti. La mia esperienza in Africa dell'Ovest e centrale mi ha portato a essere vicino a conflitti armati e a situazioni di insicurezza alimentare. Nella regione dell'estremo nord del Camerun, dove da 12 anni lavoro nella diocesi di Biagua, come coordinatore diocesano dei progetti di sviluppo e di emergenza, ci troviamo ad affrontare una insicurezza generalizzata provocata dai continui attacchi terroristici della setta Boko Haram, aggravata dalla pandemia del Covid e da altri shock climatici, tra cui inondazioni e siccità. Questa situazione ambientale è molto simile a quella di altre aree limitrofe. Infatti i rapporti delle Nazioni Unite di aprile 2021 segnalano che il numero delle persone del Sahel che hanno bisogno di assistenza e protezione umanitaria ha raggiunto i 29 milioni. Questa è una nuova cifra record per 6 paesi: Burkina Faso, Camerun settentrionale, Chad, Mali, Niger e Nigeria nord-orientale, cioè 5 milioni di persone in più rispetto all'anno scorso. Di conseguenza, oltre 1.600.000 bambini sono a rischio di malnutrizione acuta grave, con un aumento del 30% in rapporto all'anno scorso. Dopo un'adeguata riflessione abbiamo deciso di concentrarsi solo sul problema della malnutrizione dei bambini. Certo, su questo settore intervengono già in modo efficace le diverse agenzie delle Nazioni Unite, UNICEF, PAM, FAO. Potevamo restare tranquilli, tanto ci sono loro. Tuttavia il loro intervento è concentrato nel curare solo i casi di malnutrizione acuta grave, cioè una piccola parte di bambini malnutriti, con la distribuzione di integratori alimentari importati, come la confezione di Pamprinut, che è questa confezione. Se si ha la pazienza di verificare sul retro della confezione, si noterà che contengono cereali e prodotti agricoli reperibili in tutta la zona tropicale e subtropicale africana. Il tutto è poi completato con vitamine e prodotti oligominerali. Ci siamo domandati, ma come si farà a sostenere i costi del trasporto e della distribuzione quando le agenzie non saranno più qui per distribuire questi integratori ai bambini malnutriti? Così abbiamo cercato di studiare come risolvere la malnutrizione dei bambini, ma anche delle persone anziane, sole e vulnerabili, con una soluzione endogena, praticabile, disponibile e a costi ragionevoli. Ci siamo ricordati quanto diceva Mark Twain parlando dei pionieri in America. Non sapevano che era impossibile, allora l'hanno realizzata. Anche noi abbiamo seguito questo criterio. Sembra incredibile che nel 2021 l'uomo riesca ad andare su Marte e non riesca a salvare dei bambini malnutriti sulla Terra. Forse è una questione di priorità nelle scelte e negli interessi. La saggezza popolare ci insegna che se dai a una persona un pesce, mangerà un giorno. Se gli insegna a pescare, mangerà tutta la vita. La soluzione semplice e efficace l'abbiamo trovata nell'albero della moringa oleifera, nota anche come albero della vita. È un albero a crescita rapida, già presente nel Sahel, ed è considerata un superalimento verificato da diverse università, perché è alimento completo e equilibrato, con un concentrato di proteine, calcio, ferro, potassio e vitamina A, B, C ed E. Il prodotto finale sarà la farina di foglie di moringa, confezionata in sacchetti da 50 grammi per un utilizzo diffuso a livello familiare, come queste. Queste e molte altre informazioni sono di dominio pubblico e tutti possono trovarle sul sito insidemoringa.com. Allora ci siamo domandati: perché questa pianta non si è ancora sviluppata e divulgata come soluzione al problema della malnutrizione in Africa? La risposta sembra abbastanza chiara, anche se complessa. Da una parte le informazioni sulle potenzialità di questa pianta non sono conosciute da tutti gli operatori coinvolti. Dall'altra, per cambiare certe scelte c'è bisogno di una decisione politica, sostenuta da un accompagnamento tecnico iniziale. Mi spiego meglio. L'utilizzo nutrizionale e terapeutico dell'albero della moringa è conosciuto dai tempi dei faraoni. Le foglie sono utilizzate come integratore alimentare e i semi come purificatore dell'acqua. In India poi le diverse parti dell'albero di moringa sono utilizzate nella farmacopea tradizionale per curare oltre 300 malattie. Sfortunatamente queste conoscenze non sono molto conosciute e utilizzate finora nell'area subsahariana. Diventa quindi necessaria un'opera di informazione e sensibilizzazione a livello locale, regionale e nazionale. La decisione politica poi è necessaria perché si tratta di avviare un cambiamento di strategia, passare cioè da una soluzione basata su dei prodotti importati a una produzione locale delle risorse nutrizionali con gli stessi beneficiari, affinché le realtà agricole africane siano pronte quando le agenzie delle Nazioni Unite termineranno il loro servizio. Per questo è importante il coinvolgimento e l'impegno di tutti, agricoltori, autorità locali, società civile, ONG, in particolare quelle di ispirazione cristiana, e il mondo accademico. Purtroppo sembra un problema facile da risolvere, ma nella realtà quotidiana africana non è così semplice. Innanzitutto c'è bisogno di credere in questo processo innovativo. Le encicliche Laudato Si e Fratelli Tutti ci offrono degli spunti interessanti ed utili, ma se rimangono teorie, niente cambierà. Fino a quando ognuno di noi non cambierà qualcosa di concreto nella propria vita, mai niente cambierà nella realtà che ci circonda. Da circa 2 anni, come Caritas Iagua, abbiamo iniziato a riflettere e a mettere in atto delle azioni concrete per favorire le conoscenze indispensabili sulla produzione e trasformazione dei prodotti della moringa, sia a livello nutrizionale che terapeutici. Da 1 anno poi abbiamo avviato un piccolo progetto pilota per 1000 famiglie, cioè 7.000 persone, in 14 villaggi di 2 province limitrofe, coinvolgendo innanzitutto le donne con bambini piccoli. Non è possibile qui esporre i dettagli, ma è importante sapere che siamo partiti dalla formazione delle donne e dei giovani e con la distribuzione di 10.000 piantine di moringa, in modo che fra qualche mese si potrà già produrre della farina di moringa. Al momento è troppo presto per poter disporre di statistiche, ma il dato positivo e interessante è il costante aumento delle richieste di piantine di moringa da parte dei centri sanitari e delle organizzazioni femminili coinvolte. Se è vero il criterio di pensare globalmente e agire localmente, Ci auguriamo che questo progetto realizzato in Camerun possa creare un effetto moltiplicatore attraverso lo scambio di informazioni nella rete Moringa, che raggruppa circa 40 organizzazioni attive in oltre 10 paesi dell'Africa dell'Ovest e centrale. In ogni caso, se si vuole fare un passo in avanti, è necessario sperimentare da subito nuove soluzioni con la Moringa. Non si tratta di sognare l'impossibile, ma di consolidare delle soluzioni già sperimentate e riproducibili da subito. Attendere ancora sarebbe il riconoscimento di una volontà di non agire. Come si è detto, le soluzioni tecniche, le conoscenze teoriche e pratiche e le persone motivate sono già disponibili a livello locale africano. Quello che manca ancora è un progetto Moringa interregionale, per il quale c'è bisogno di un coinvolgimento organizzativo e finanziario da parte delle autorità amministrative, dei responsabili delle agenzie delle Nazioni Unite, oltre che delle organizzazioni della società civile. Con questa speranza, una delle ipotesi per poter concretizzare questo programma sarebbe di poter disporre per i prossimi 3 anni del corrispondente del 2-3% delle risorse già previste per l'acquisto e la distribuzione degli integratori alimentari importati per questo progetto. L'unione fa la forza, dicevano i vecchi saggi, ed è valido anche per questa nostra realtà. Il nostro obiettivo è di poter combattere la malnutrizione in Africa con la Moringa, in modo da assicurare una soluzione duratura e a disposizione di tutti. Sarebbe un passo significativo della volontà di trovare una soluzione duratura alla sicurezza nutrizionale dei bambini e delle persone più vulnerabili. Alla fine dovremmo fare una scelta etica tra cosa rappresenta la confezione del pumpkin nut e il sacchetto di farina di Moringa. Grazie per l'attenzione e la pazienza.
Eccoci. Grazie Padre Fabio, grazie per queste immagini dell'Africa, dove la fame si sente, ma anche si vede la gioia nel volto delle persone che evidentemente stanno lì e che seguono i progetti che lei porta avanti. Grazie per questo esempio anche di scienza che viene dal basso, anche in questo senso, e per le proposte che porta a questo tavolo. E anche grazie per l'ispirazione del tanto ci sono io, ci sono loro, che è quanto di più forse anticristiano c'è, ed è l'opposto esatto di quell'I care di cui in varie occasioni recentemente siamo stati ricordati. Insomma. Forse direi, I'd say thank you to the speakers for this first part of the meeting. Thank you for your words. Thank you for integrating each other's reflection. And I believe that we should probably close this first session more aware of how effective food systems integrate a sense of responsibility for all human beings, so that food production does not draw from creation more than it gives back. But the time does not allow us for the time being to continue, since our second session will be coming up soon. I should now pass the floor to a few minutes of a video, we'll have a short break, and in the meanwhile you will be shown a video on today's theme. It has been prepared, I'm told, by the Economy of Francesco, by their group. It offers a youthful and global perspective to our reflection. So I would suggest that it's a high note to end, and it is a good way to start our coming reflection for the rest of the afternoon. Thank you, everybody, and see you in 5 minutes.
We youth from Agriculture and Justice Village from the Economy of Francesco understand that these are the fundamentals for an ecological conversion towards integral ecology.
First, protecting biodiversity and encouraging the availability of a diverse diet. that provides nutritious and delicious food, as well as promotes the health of populations and communities.
Second, guaranteeing decent working and living conditions to farmers, especially migrants and all the most vulnerable workers often exploiting the production system. We have to apply the integral ecology to the food system along the whole production chain by guaranteeing fair salaries to workers, fair price to producer, and food sovereignty to territories and communities. By building an economic and political arrangement safeguarding at the same time workers, producers, and the environment.
Third, safeguard the rights of women within a gender equality proposal, as well as attention, young people, and elderly.
Fourth, seeking the demarcation of indigenous lands and indigenous peoples, as well as agrarian reform, so that the land fulfills its social environmental function and serves the population by promoting housing, employment, food, and income, and its regenerative vocation to safeguard biodiversity.
Encouraging the development of communities in order to make them more autonomous, self-sufficient, and resilient through the biodiverse and integrated use of land, as are the agroforestry production systems and the production of their own sustainable inputs, such as self-generation of energy, fertilizers, and natural pesticides.
Sixth, creating a support network that economically enables the activity of small rural and urban agricultural producers, providing consultants, such as accountants, and other professionals who can provide service at fair prices, technical, legal, financial, etc., for the creation of a new business.
Seventh, stimulating debates and proposing public policies reforms within governments and public administrations, addressing main topics such as taxation, the need for decentralized technical, legal, business assistance systems to producer, public purchase of food for popular and school meals, access to credit, energy, sanitation, and distribution infrastructure that facilitate farmers to access markets in order to obtain a fair value for their work, for our work.
8. Structuring connection between scientists and technological production and the development of solutions that effectively benefit the producer and the consumer.
9th, designing and developing useful tools such as a digital platform to connect farmers and consumers to be operated through a new social and ethical currency backed by food production, enabling the formation of community banks aimed at a truly sustainable local development.
10th, building a new narrative that generates a paradigm shift to replace markets, competition, and profits for relations of exchange and cooperation. A new narrative that promotes food sovereignty through self-consumption coupled with exchanges of surpluses that provide a fair price to producers and consumers, and at the same time contributes to reducing losses and waste.
Very well. Congratulations to our friends of the Economy of Francesco for this video, for bringing the contributions of so many different places and so many different faces also. And good afternoon again. As we said, we are back after this short break for the second part of this afternoon's meeting, and we have fruitfully examined up to now how food systems connect to integral human development. And now we will take a step further and look into one of the most severe causes for the disruption of food systems, which is something that we mentioned already during our first hour of work, as well as a consequence of their breakdown, which is conflict. We are well aware of the increasing number of conflicts around the world, sometimes extremely localized clashes, we mentioned, and many of them are the cause or consequence of a struggle over food and water. We have the chance to examine this topic from a number of different perspectives, thanks to our speakers for the coming hour. And I'd like to ask Dr. Agnes Kalibata, UN Special Envoy for the Food Systems Summit, to open this part of the roundtable this afternoon. And I am very grateful to have her here at this table, though only virtually, but the time will come, of course, for visits to Rome, hopefully. But in the meanwhile, Dr. Kalibata, I pass you the floor from a distance, but at close. Thank you for being here.
And thank you for inviting me. Let me start by thanking His Grace Colonel Tuxon for the leadership that he's provided with his opening remarks, but also for the leadership he's provided linking to the Food Systems Summit as a champion of the Food Systems Summit. These 3 days have been an opportunity for you all, through the meetings you've had, to highlight some of the challenges that we are living through, and to really bring out major issues, especially around hunger, that impact mankind, really underscoring the point that we keep making, that this Food Systems Summit is about people in the first place. So I really wanted to appreciate the putting these meetings together, the efforts that have gone in, the different institutions that have contributed to this, and linking it to food systems and really highlighting the centrality of people in this food systems meeting. We are discussing here today some of the oldest issues of mankind: the question of hunger, the question of justice, and the question of conflict. When you look at what's been happening in the last few years alone, as the 2021 Global Food Crisis Report shows, 100 million people in 23 countries today are hungry as a result of crisis and conflict, crisis resulting from conflict. 40 million people, of course, are hungry because of COVID. Interestingly, this is the only year we are beginning to see that hunger resulting from climate change has gone down. It's down by about, from 34 million in 2019 to 16 million. So here, the thing is, in the number of countries that keep showing up around these challenges, not surprisingly, end up always being about the same. And I will say what I said earlier in one of these meetings: the question of poverty as an underlying factor to this crisis that keep fueling hunger cannot be underestimated. 6 of the countries, of the 10 countries that have the worst crisis in the world, are from Africa. And there's no question in my mind that these crises are being driven by poverty. See, in 1994, when the Rwandan crisis happened, there was no way anybody could convince another person to kill their neighbor unless it was because their neighbor had something to benefit. And usually that was a cow, that was a small land to farm, that was poverty, something that was definitely driven by poverty. So addressing the underlying cause of hunger, of conflict, is going to have to be our primary goal. It's no accident that goal number 1 in the SDGs is about poverty and addressing poverty. So many of these things are anchored in poverty. Hunger and conflict are mutually reinforcing. And I'll give you another example. The king of Morocco, hundreds of years ago, I was told when I was visiting Morocco, in my recent visits, realized that every time there was, there seemed to be some cycle around the incidence of hunger, the incidence of conflict in his country. And he decided to invest, he decided to really prioritize agriculture as a mechanism of dealing with conflict in his country. And it is no wonder today that Morocco is one of the countries that have one of the best agricultural systems in Africa. But it's also no wonder that countries that recognize that food security is critical to national security are the same countries that have managed to drive hunger numbers down. In the Food Systems Summit, we've designed the summit primarily to address the question of people, putting people at the center of the summit, And because of that, we've designed a number of action tracks, whether it's action track 1 that looks at access to food, all the way to the action track that looks at resilience. 3 things keep coming up. The question of access to food, nourishing people, the question of recognizing that whatever impacts people also ends up impacting our environment, and being able to put our environment at the center of feeding people becoming important, and the question of inequity and the need for resilience, to build resilient systems to continue reducing inequity. The point that Cardinal Turkson made on the integral ecology cannot be overstated here. Man as a critical element of that integral ecology, and we need to recognize our position as a critical element, impacting our environment and being impacted by environment. And we must use the food system as an opportunity really to have the dialogues between ourselves, between the countries. We have initiated dialogues around the world for the very reason that we recognize the interconnectedness of our ecosystem and how integral the functionality or the health of our ecosystem is to mankind. And we hope that locally people can have conversations that allow all of us to really discuss what is broken in our system, whether it is in Nigeria, where people are being forced to free their lands, they can't farm, whether it is in Cameroon, where simple food systems are not functioning the way they should function. We need to ask ourselves, don't we know what needs to be done today after so many years of the right technologies and innovations, after so many years of understanding how we could invest in these systems, after so much that surrounds us in terms of functional policies that can drive better systems? The opportunities are immense, and the things that we can learn from each other are immense. So I hope that the opportunity for dialogue at community level does drive the right conversations, but also at regional level does give an opportunity to countries to have a conversation around what is not happening right. In the end, we really must ask ourselves the question of whether coming through in this food system is going to be about coming through for people, whether we have the brevity, the ability to come through for people with regards to ending hunger. The question of hunger is not something that is unsolvable. It's something that 90% of the world has figured out how to solve. It's something that we can do, but we have the right level of will, as many of you have said. We have the right level of anxiety and urgency to be able to come through for people. I hope that we do, and I hope that this gives us the Food System Summit, as we go into the pre-summit and the summit, is really an opportunity for us to come through for mankind together. We must condemn the use of hunger as a weapon, as we see in many conflicts, enforcing and calling for the enforcement of Resolution 2417 that condemns the use of hunger as a weapon. We must see this as an opportunity to come through for human beings, to come through for the most vulnerable among us. And COVID-19 has shown us that these people are everywhere among us. So I hope that the Food System Summit really uses the opportunity. And thank you again for profiling the need for the end to hunger and for providing the need to raise our consciousness as a way of ending and dealing with hunger. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kalibata. Thank you for your precious insight into this theme, for your passion also really in relating the challenges overcome and the challenges that lie up ahead in view of the coming summit. And you mentioned putting people at the center for the coming summit, and really putting the right people at the center also for the work that is up ahead. But you also mentioned healing those places of sufferance in the world, which are often, you said, the same and have been the same for many, many years. And that is a responsibility that rises also from this table to its participant and through its participants to those whom we are in touch with. Thank you. And now I would like to pass the floor to Professor Joachim von Braun. And my German isn't as good as my English. So,
good enough.
President of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. I welcome him. This is his home in a certain way. But I'm very glad that he is with us today, and I pass him the floor. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction. Excellencies and colleagues, I'm pleased to be with you. Sorry that I could not sit with you today at Casina Pio 4 because of another commitment. I want to first share some personal research insights that date back quite some decades. In the mid-1980s, I traveled back and forth between Sudan and Ethiopia to study food crises, famines, and their causes at local level and national level. In Darfur, Sudan, where I worked, paramilitary robbers destroyed the assets of pastoralists by stealing cattle, burning villages, and killing people. Refugees from neighboring regions found little to survive. Camps were springing up, supported by aid agencies, and these camps still are there. Agnes Kalibata just mentioned, these things last. Government did little to help, actually was part of the problem, forbidding even to use the word famine. An estimated 240,000 people died in the mid-80s in that hunger crisis. Natural causes played a role too. There had been droughts for several years in a row, and severe one with declining rains by 60%. In Ethiopia, too, there had been droughts in the mid-1980s. The production decline had also, however, political causes, primarily, such as forcing small farmers to resettle and little investment made in agriculture. Fundamental, however, was oppression by the state. The famine of 1983-84 led to about 1 million lives lost. We saw social sharing collapse at communities where we worked. And against tradition, for instance, doors were closed when eating so that one would not need to share food. Later in the 1980s and early 1990s, I had research in Guatemala and Central America and in the Gambia and West Africa on food and agriculture problems. There, other conflicts stood out. In Guatemala, I studied farming in the Western Highlands, an oppressive regime for a long time had marginalized indigenous peoples, took their land, and that was the case in so many regions in the Americas. Civil unrest, government gangs killing civilians was a problem in the late 1980s and earlier. Malnutrition was and is widespread. But there were also bright lights, cooperation among small farmers with farming products marketed domestically and internationally did make a significant difference. In the Gambia, we studied a modern rice project that produced high yields, but land issues came up. Land property rights were not clarified. Land that was originally mainly used by women became men's rice fields, and food conflicts became intra-household and intra-community conflicts. So I'm telling you, we have to have a careful look at the nature and causes of conflicts. Let's ask, what have we learned since over these last 30 years? We have learned that conflicts are context specific, but there are also some general and common insights that need attention by the Food Systems Summit. From these cases, we can conclude food problems were to a significant extent the result of conflicts and war that arose due to oppressive, unaccountable, and non-participatory governments. We must not shy away from saying that. International peace, protecting interventions, and aid came far too late in these cases. That's the second conclusion. Third, grossly flawed domestic economic policies have contributed to the political climate in which conflicts emerged. Research, excellencies and colleagues, research has examined the mutual impact between violent conflicts and food insecurity. and found strong correlations. But we must be interested not in correlations, but in causalities. And there are three lines of causalities which we need to distinguish. Armed conflicts cause food problems, for instance, through economic disruptions. Resource conflicts cause food problems, for instance, between herders and farmers, the Cain and Abel issue. And third, food problems cause conflicts such as through drastic food price increases. Let me briefly touch on these three. Conflicts cause food problems. Violent interactions go hand in hand with physical destruction, affecting people's vulnerabilities in various ways. Small-scale agriculture is particularly strongly affected. It takes years to rebuild after conflict. For example, in Syria and Iraq, the agrarian zones seized by Islamic State were maintained to a large extent despite massive forced displacement. During conflicts, warring factions try to use agriculture and its resources as a source. Food insecurity can become a weapon of war by preventing access to food to other regions, as happened in South Sudan, in the Central African Republic, in Yemen and Syria currently. Secondly, and I ask the media room to put up just for a moment one slide, please. It's only one slide. Moderator, I will not take much time. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for putting up that slide. If you look at this map of the Sahel from Senegal over to Somalia, you see some red and some blue dots. These are locations of conflict in the year 2000 to 2017. The red dots are resource-related conflicts over land and water and food. The others are more political, religious, and ethnicity-related conflicts. Actually, it's very difficult and somewhat artificial to separate them in these two categories. But I just want to highlight two things: the density and the prevalence. And if you look at these maps over time, the densities have increased. So something you can take off the slide, please. So we have to pay attention to the nature of these resource-related conflicts. Third, food problems cause conflicts. Food security can increase social grievances in combination with socioeconomic and political inequalities. That was the case with the explosive food price increases in 2008 and 2009. Which led to protests in more than 60 countries. More than half of them were actually violent. So the Food Systems Summit needs to pay attention to these issues related to well-functioning markets. Let me conclude with 2 points on what needs to be done. We identified the investment cost of approaching an end of hunger and achieving SDG 2. The incremental costs would be $40 to $50 billion per annum over the coming 10 years. For the more than 100 million undernourished people in conflict context, however, additional food system summit action is needed. I emphasize these 2 points. One, respect the access to food as a human right during violent conflicts. If a government lacks the capacity to prevent or mitigate a food crisis, it must allow and facilitate relief operations as demanded by humanitarian law. The deliberate starvation of civilians is considered a war crime in the International Criminal Court Rome Statutes. The Geneva Convention from 1977 provides safeguards for protecting the civilian population during conflicts. Any government or warring faction that prohibits parts of the population from access to food needs to be sanctioned. The UN Security Council Resolution 2417 stresses the importance of compliance with that. It needs to be re-emphasized at the summit. The second set of issues which I want to highlight for the summit is enabling food system transformation with a focused development investment at scale, including the affected communities. Communities must be part of this because they know best what to do. However, emergency aid needs a flexible account to draw from when needed. We must come to an end to this begging when crisis is already there and then aid comes too late. It needs massive external funding alongside domestic initiatives by governments. I just want to but re-emphasize the developmental issues and the poverty issues which Agnes Kalibata already mentioned. As the agenda is complex, it is also research and science intensive. In conclusion, the Food Systems Summit, as a meeting of heads of states, has an opportunity to act on this complex set of issues. Diplomacy strengthens the United Nations capacity to support security, international criminal law enforcement, economic development policy are the key elements that need to come together with development. It is an ethical and humanitarian imperative, and that is why the voice of the Vatican and of Pope Francis' encyclicals Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti are so relevant for this agenda. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor von Braun. Thank you. Your expertise in the field of food economics is crucial, really, as we move towards the Food Systems Summit. And it makes the Academy itself really a critical companion on this journey. And thank you for your remarks that speak directly also to the concerns raised by Dr. Kalibata. You said it takes years to rebuild after conflict, and that is true, and certainly in those situations that Dr. Kalibata was mentioning before, and how really war is the mother of all poverty, even in food systems as well. Of course, you mentioned the need for new foreign policies and for policies in general, and you mentioned also these two aspects which are crucial, that the respect of the right to access to food, and of course how communities must be at the table in defining how that access should take place. I thank you once again, Professor, and we can continue on the path of this economic also perspective, how economy, food systems and conflict are intertwined. There is a contribution to our reflection this afternoon that comes from the workshop of the economy of Francesco. And I speak of workshop for a reason. This gathering for the time being on the web of young scientists and scholars that started its discernment in the past year, inspired by Francis of Assisi and Pope Francis. I pass the floor to Maurizio Pizzolu and Virginia Solus, who together will be offering their contribution, and I thank them for being here with us this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Grazie a tutti. I will present in Italian. I apologize for that, but I prepared a very short speech about the economy of Francesca, then I will pass the word to Virginia Solis. Francesco, va e ricostruisci la mia casa che è tutta in rovina. Con queste parole, più di 800 anni fa, Dio chiama San Francesco alla sua missione e alla sua vocazione per la ricostruzione di una chiesa corrotta e in forte crisi. Con le stesse parole, il 1 maggio del 2019, un papa, chiamato anch'egli Francesco, invita tutti gli uomini di buona volontà e in particolare i giovani economisti, imprenditori e attori del cambiamento di tutto il mondo alla stessa chiamata, per ricostruire la Chiesa e il mondo nuovamente in rovina. Sappiamo tutti di vivere un momento complesso, non soltanto a causa della pandemia che ha costretto il mondo a fermarsi per più di un anno, dando peraltro la possibilità a molti di noi di interrogarci su dove stiamo andando con la nostra storia di uomini e di credenti. Sappiamo anche di vivere un momento di profondo cambiamento, in cui è necessario pensare ed agire con coraggio e discernimento, trovando la coesione necessaria tra gli uomini di buona volontà per poter costruire le fondamenta di un'economia che costruisce e non distrugge, che aggrega e non separa, che avvicina e non acuisce le differenze tra ricchi e poveri. Tutti conosciamo i numeri di questa profonda crisi. grosse ricchezze accumulate nelle mani di poche persone, tanti uomini e donne anche nei paesi sviluppati, come si diceva all'inizio, anche a Roma, che soffrono problemi legati alla povertà o alla malnutrizione, che si ammalano a causa del cibo o dell'aria che respirano quotidianamente o dell'acqua che bevono. Tutti respiriamo l'avvelenamento quotidiano dei nostri corpi, delle nostre menti e dei nostri cuori a causa dell'impoverimento dei beni relazionali ed in particolare a causa dell'erosione continua della fiducia reciproca, legante e imprescindibile per una vita gioiosa e di senso dell'uomo sulla terra. A questa chiamata urgente, più di 3.000 giovani di tutto il mondo, cristiani e non cristiani, hanno risposto con grande entusiasmo, energia, vitalità ed impegno per ragionare e costruire insieme un'economia diversa che finalmente possa dare la possibilità all'uomo di guardare con coraggio a quella faccia della medaglia che Gesù mostra ai Romani quando, alzando la famosa moneta, dice: non potete adorare Dio e il denaro insieme. Ecco, con Economia di Francesco noi giovani vorremmo cambiare questo paradigma. Tanti progetti, ricerche, idee stanno prendendo forma in questi mesi per poter concretizzare questa chiamata. Ed in particolare i progetti del villaggio dell'Economia di Francesco, chiamato Agricoltura e Giustizia, sta già realizzando delle opere profetiche perché il mondo possa davvero ritrovare l'amore necessario per contribuire all'edificazione dell'opera di Dio sulla terra. Ora, come vi dicevo, passerò la parola a Maria Virginia Solis, una delle giovani coordinatrici del villaggio dell'Agricoltura e Giustizia, che ci racconterà che cosa il villaggio sta oggi già costruendo e che cosa sogna di fare per il futuro di questa nuova economia, anche grazie al vostro aiuto. Maria Virginia.
Gracias, Mauricio. And thank you everyone for the opportunity to be here today. First, before sharing, I want to say that even though today is Mauricio and I, we are sharing and speaking on behalf of a lot of youth that are working every day to create a new economy and a new life. So I will be sharing my screen. Agriculture and justice are keywords that together answer the great challenges of an ecological conversion towards integral ecology. Agriculture is the basis of all food production, while justice of every democratic system. These words, if mutually intervene and in harmony, form the basis of a free and dignified society, where people are at the center. Pope Francis invites us to practice fraternal love as the realization of social justice. With this objective, our village has youth representing farmers, indigenous people, social activists, business owners, and researchers from all over the world, with an active collaboration of seniors who support sharing their knowledge and experience and walk this journey with us. The main challenges and pillars we consider key in agriculture are integral ecology, agriculture woman, the real value of food, and the care of the common house. And in order to face the sensitive issues and decide how to act creating justice in agriculture, we understand that there are at least 10 fundamentals, those that were shared before by youth from our village in the video. To act and build prophetic, but also specific projects, we are organized in 4 streams: project, startup, research, and communication, working together with the local territorial hubs in the different countries around the world, following a process of see, choose, and act provided by Pope Francis. This is how the Farm of Francesco was born in June 2020, answering Pope Francis' call to restore our common house and addressing injustices present in our economy. The Farm of Francesco is a global network of farm-centered demo farms with a vocational educational program to co-create solutions towards sustainable food systems and regenerative soils. Currently, small farmers who grow over 80% of the world food, most of them women, live the main food system conflicts, facing uncertain ownership rights to the land they farm, and not having access to knowledge of beneficial farming practices. At the same time, global food and climate security is threatened by 12 million hectares per year of soil lost due to erosion. What was a project and vision of 10 youth representing 8 countries to solve these issues is today a reality, with the 2 demo farms in Ibadan, Nigeria, and Manaus, Brazil. Our model is teaching regenerative agriculture practices on an existing demo farm, offering a viable opportunity for disadvantaged youth to build regenerative livelihoods for themselves and their families. Guided by our scientific validated impact dashboard, a work done together with the Research, Agriculture and Justice team, we are developing our business in a hybrid formula. The farm is a viable business operation on its own, supplemented by income generated by new farms set up by the trainees. The other initiative as part of the village is the Women Mother Earth Alliance, which seeks to offer concrete answers to the demand of Tierra, Techo y Trabajo for women, with a focus in rural areas of Brazil and the world, to defend their rights of access to generic resources and to build fair relationships around the production, trade, and consumption of healthy food. The Alliance is rooted in 2 pillars: to promote this agenda in the global public debate, as to build dialogues and bridges that put forward Pope Francis in diverse multilateral forums, and comprises the development of actions and projects. One of the projects created together with the Energy and Poverty Village is Casa di Francesco, a possibility to refound cities by creating places for entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship, and the prototype is in development in Florianopolis, Brazil. Other ongoing initiatives in our village is research on the topic of fair prices for a more human and environmental sustainable agriculture, to respond and give voice to the conflicts of exploitation of farmhands, especially migrants and local women, as well as having participations in events thanks to our partners, like in the International Conference on Environmental Justice in Switzerland, a set of masterclasses for the World Food Forum, and the co-creation of the Latino American Economic of Francesco School. All these initiatives are for us important to be active creators of the new narrative on agriculture towards integral ecology. Today, more than ever, we need the participation and active collaboration of key institutions and the church. We invite you, all of you, to actively join and collaborate in the initiatives that we are currently working on. Join our projects, our farms, so we can respond together to the cry of the earth and the poor. I had the blessing in 2013 as an Argentinian, and after hours of waiting under the rain in Rio, Brazil, to hear Pope Francis say, "Quiero que haya lío," which is, I hope there will be noise. Today, after witnessing many hours of work, Zoom calls, after spending long time with the youth that I represent in this occasion, I respond to that petition of Papa Francisco and encourage our church to open the buildings. Trust us, the management of your land. We will keep putting our hands to work, studying and brainstorming and implementing the best ideas to serve the poor. Join us on the journey of making noise towards building a new life and economy. Thank you.
Grazie a te Virginia, grazie Maurizio. Grazie anche per questo ricordo di Rio, del primo viaggio anche di Papa Francesco quando è venuto in Brasile. Thank you for your words and for the useful contribution, for your reflection. Your reflection really, and also the concrete proposals that stem from it, the Farm of Francesco, La Casa di Francesco, which you shared for us, are particularly precious for the work up ahead. So thank you once again. And while I wish you the best for the coming stages of your important gathering and discernment, I will now pass the floor to Professor Buonomo, Rector of the Pontifical Lateran University. I thank him for joining our meeting this afternoon. Professore, a lei la parola. Grazie.
E così cerco di tenermi nei tempi, visto che il tema è quello della giustizia alimentare e della costruzione della pace, quindi cerco di stare nei tempi. Una prima lettura ci porta a dire che la sicurezza alimentare non è più soltanto un fattore indispensabile per le attività del mondo rurale, ma non è più un obiettivo primario per le strategie di sradicare la povertà, ma è soprattutto parte del più ampio concetto di sicurezza umana. La sicurezza che riguarda le persone, i gruppi e i popoli. Questo ha interrotto il riferimento ai sistemi alimentari legati al lavoro agricolo e all'attività umana, per concentrarsi sulla produzione economica e sullo scambio. Siamo ormai lontani da considerare la sicurezza alimentare come la relazione tra la produzione e la disponibilità di alimenti. Lo dimostra il fatto che il concetto di sicurezza alimentare è usato nelle aree sviluppate per determinare o indicare i livelli di vita o gli stili di vita. Nelle aree più povere la sicurezza alimentare determina l'indice di sopravvivenza umana. Questa impostazione ha modificato il modo di intendere la sicurezza alimentare e quindi anche la lettura dei sistemi alimentari che vogliono essere un supporto alla sicurezza stessa. Anzitutto perché c'è un obiettivo che non è soltanto quello di rafforzare il dato tecnico, produzione, disponibilità, commercio, ma soprattutto la conseguenza è quella di sviluppare il cosiddetto dovere morale degli Stati per costruire un'azione politica interna e la cooperazione internazionale. Questa non è un'espressione di oggi, ma la ritroviamo già nel novembre del 1985 nel Global Compact on Food Security adottato dalla FAO, in occasione del 40° anniversario e ripreso direttamente da Giovanni Paolo II nel corso dell'udienza rivolta alla conferenza l'11 di novembre di quello stesso anno. Quindi il problema è il dovere morale. Chiaramente qui bisogna costruire il concetto di dovere morale legandolo al concetto di giustizia. Cosa può significare? Anzitutto limitare la sicurezza alimentare ai cambiamenti climatici, alle fonti di energia pulita o alle tariffe commerciali può essere certamente importante e necessario, ma bisogna evitare che questo rischi di essere un'operazione di immagine, slegata dalla realtà di persone, di comunità e di popoli. L'attività internazionale insegna che ogni azione teorica, se non promuove il diritto a migliori condizioni, di fatto non serve. Qui il problema è la giustiziabilità del diritto alla sicurezza alimentare. Credo che questo è un passo importante. Il professor von Braun andava già oltre, parlando addirittura di un processo di criminalizzazione legato all'uso delle risorse alimentari o al non uso, alla non distribuzione delle risorse alimentari, riferendosi appunto alla Corte Penale Internazionale. Ma già il processo primario, cioè la giustiziabilità di un diritto, già diventa un primo elemento importante. Il metodo che ci viene offerto leggendo Fratelli Tutti è un metodo in cui il tutto viene pensato per rendere prioritaria non la sicurezza e la sopravvivenza umana, ma condizioni di vita in cui le persone possano realizzare il loro sviluppo integrale o possono realizzare un'ecologia integrale. Questo è il metodo su cui si potrebbe affrontare la questione. Certo, questo approccio determina che l'obiettivo food for all, cibo per tutti, è certamente importante, ma rischia di limitarsi ad affermare che nessuno deve rimanere indifferente di fronte a coloro che sono privati di cibo. Diversamente, credo che sia necessario recuperare l'autonomia della sicurezza alimentare, riconoscendola come un elemento importante non solo per produrre, disporre e avere accesso al cibo, ma come interesse individuale di popoli, di gruppi per la sopravvivenza della famiglia umana. Qui la prospettiva, la riprendo dalla Fratelli Tutti, è la prospettiva della crescita della popolazione, perché il rischio è quello di trovarsi nella stessa condizione o situazione degli anni 70 del secolo scorso con la prima crisi saheliana, 1971, in cui il passaggio dai 4 miliardi e 6 della popolazione mondiale ai circa 7 miliardi determinò già un primo problema di insicurezza e addirittura di crisi e di fame. Sostenere, anche qui c'è l'altro passaggio, cioè una responsabilità comune per garantire la sicurezza alimentare, è certamente obiettivo, ma bisognerebbe anche differenziare gli obblighi e i diritti di ciascuno dei protagonisti, perché altrimenti si rischia di assumere azioni che proprio diventano irrilevanti rispetto ai conflitti. Siamo chiamati, in altre parole, utilizzando la metodologia di Fratelli Tutti, ad un'armonica collocazione della sicurezza alimentare oltre gli interventi attualmente messi in atto nella comunità internazionale. La base per la sicurezza alimentare è cioè l'interesse comune. Nelle dinamiche internazionali oggi si tende a realizzare una unità di intenti pur avendo molteplici ostacoli. Nel caso della fame e della povertà si tratta per esempio di considerare non solo le aspettative di vita, non solo il differente livello di sviluppo, ma la cosiddetta giustizia alimentare, che significa non eliminare la fame, ma sconfiggere tutte le situazioni che possono determinare la fame. Il contrario sarebbe una omissione, proprio in termini di continuità rispetto alla visione dell'enciclica stessa, che può facilmente collegarsi con gli obiettivi che il diritto internazionale o anche le strategie internazionali legate al diritto alla sicurezza alimentare o al diritto all'alimentazione ci hanno fatto crescere in questi anni. Quando si tratta quindi di un lavoro non privo di insidie, evidentemente, ma nel quale il problema della differenza di responsabilità può essere una strada da percorrere. Un riferimento immediato arriva alla questione dei conflitti. La relazione tra sicurezza alimentare e realtà della pace va approfondita almeno attraverso 3 diverse chiavi di lettura. Quanto la sicurezza alimentare o l'insicurezza alimentare ostacola la pace o la favorisce. Qui c'è un problema di una dimensione nei fatti, cioè nelle politiche internazionali e interne, e c'è poi l'altro aspetto, cioè la dimensione istituzionale. I conflitti non si risolvono soltanto con un incontro, ma i conflitti vanno poi incanalati nella costruzione di istituzioni capaci di gestire i processi di pace. Qui il rapporto quindi non è tra un peace building e food security. Il rapporto è tra un peace enforcement da una parte e un peacekeeping che sia quotidianamente realizzato, cioè quindi una costruzione della pace non in rapporto soltanto alle emergenze, ma in rapporto a soluzioni continuative. L'esempio del Camerun può essere indicativo sotto questo aspetto nel conflitto, quale può essere l'uso del fattore sicurezza alimentare. Questo tra l'altro consentirebbe anche di poter modificare gli asset e gli equilibri che oggi sono determinati dall'agenda di sviluppo sostenibile. Del resto siamo chiamati non soltanto a confrontarci con l'idea di conflitto, ma con l'idea di costruire un'architettura della pace e quindi di conseguenza questo determina dei processi decisionali e soprattutto determina una dinamica istituzionale che sia in grado di leggere i processi e non soltanto di dare risposte in termini di emergenza. Concludo facendo riferimento a quello che può essere lo sviluppo di un diritto internazionale e di una comunità internazionale che opera in rapporto alla sicurezza alimentare e alla giustizia alimentare. Il diritto internazionale umanitario ci dice non soltanto che va protetta la popolazione civile in caso di conflitto, ma la popolazione civile in caso di situazioni che non sono governate. Questo è tipico della visione, non più di una visione legata al conflitto, ma piuttosto di una visione legata a costruire la pace. Questo è l'elemento che modifica l'approccio. Secondo, le strategie di emergenza e anche quelle che possono essere risoluzioni o azioni finalizzate alla sicurezza alimentare non possono essere considerate dei momenti ripetitivi, ma sono soprattutto elementi che mostrano la governabilità in termini culturali, politici, istituzionali ed economici. In altri termini, l'insicurezza o la sicurezza alimentare va governata. Non ha bisogno soltanto di risposte che siano risposte nell'immediato. In questo senso, lo slancio verso la giustizia e l'ansia di pace possono essere in qualche modo coordinate. Grazie.
Grazie a lei, professore, anche proprio per questo slancio verso la giustizia e la necessità di costruire la pace. Grazie per aver parlato di moral duty, la moral duty which does, of course, have a role to play and which needs to be better acknowledged by governments and all those who have responsibility in developing legislation at a national and international level. And indeed, there is a growing awareness in different sectors of societies, especially powerful and I would say globally transversal in younger generations, which, as we have seen also today with our friends from the economy of Francesco, which needs to find an echo in regulations and statutes for institutions to maintain their credibility. Lei parlava giustamente di giustiziabilità, quindi. Thank you for your work in this regard. Now, I would say that unfortunately, there is not much time left to go any deeper into the various issues that were pointed out by our audience today, though a number of them, I must say, have found a response in the extensive reflection that we have carried out this afternoon. And I'd mention, for instance, the emphasis on the work and activity and the importance of small farmers, which one of our listeners mentioned, the importance of local food systems and how they interact with the wider food market and production, the issue of energy sources and how that relates to the whole problem. And then an underlying question, which I'm sure that will come up and that I'm sure that every one of us also asks him or herself, what can individuals do? And one question in particular, I think, was addressed to Dr. Agnes Kalibata. It may not be for an answer today, unfortunately, because of timing, but on the importance of the pre-summit for the Food Systems Summit and how the fruits of the pre-summit will interact with the summit itself. But I'm sure that this is all food for thought. But what we can say today is, of course, that there are signs that we are exploring the right direction, I would say, some concrete, others profound, that hunger can decrease and not at the cost of making life unbearable to others. That a good food system is not where a few people are unable to eat their full, but a system that integrates with other systems, as some of our audience mentioned, making sure that food is accessible to all. And now for our conclusions. I am grateful to all those who have spoken, to the speakers today, and I am grateful also to leave this task of drawing the conclusions, drawing together the wealth of insights and perspectives, to His Eminence, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Secretary of State of His Holiness the Pope, who I'm sure will add a further level of political and Christian understanding that can help our reflection continue in other circumstances and locations. Cardinal Parolin, I thank you for being with us and for taking this responsibility from my shoulders. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Un cordiale saluto a tutti. Spero di poter arrivare in fondo alla lettura, ma forse la dottoressa può leggere al mio posto perché la mia voce proprio, sì, non mi sorregge.
La dottoressa Francesca Di Giovanni, sottosegretario per il rapporto con gli Stati.
Per il settore multilaterale.
Scusate, introduco perché altrimenti...
Sua Eminenza, Eccellenze, illustri relatori, signori e signore, è mio vivo desiderio ringraziare gli organizzatori di questo ciclo di seminari e tutti gli stimati oratori che mi hanno preceduto per le significative riflessioni che ci hanno proposto. attraverso le quali abbiamo avuto modo di approfondire ulteriormente il tema della necessaria trasformazione dei sistemi alimentari per la cura del pianeta, l'eliminazione della fame, il rispetto della dignità umana e il servizio del bene comune, in modo che nessuno venga lasciato indietro, a dimostrazione che siamo un'unica famiglia umana. Il momento storico che stiamo vivendo, caratterizzato dalla rapida e inesorabile diffusione del Covid-19, sta mettendo alla prova il mondo intero e gli stessi sistemi alimentari ne subiscono profondamente l'impatto nel presente e nel futuro. I conflitti, gli shock economici e gli eventi meteorologici estremi continuano a gettare milioni di persone nella morsa della fame. I dati che abbiamo a disposizione sono desolanti. Stando all'ultimo rapporto mondiale sulle crisi alimentari, pubblicato lo scorso 5 maggio dalla Rete Mondiale contro le crisi alimentari, nel 2020 il numero di persone esposte al rischio di insicurezza alimentare acuta e bisognose di aiuti umanitari urgenti e di sostegno alla sussistenza ha raggiunto il dato più alto degli ultimi 5 anni. Abbiamo citato già prima le cifre. Non possiamo rimanere indifferenti di fronte a questi numeri, dietro i quali vi sono persone. Le buone intenzioni servono a poco. Per garantire pace e sviluppo, inteso come miglioramento delle condizioni di vita delle popolazioni che patiscono fame, guerra e povertà, sono necessarie azioni concrete, incisive e avvedute. Questo momento storico che ha messo in luce una serie di crisi sanitaria, alimentare, ambientale, socio-economica, tra loro concatenate, rappresenta un'occasione di ripartenza che non ci possiamo permettere di sprecare. In questa prospettiva, un'attenta e corretta trasformazione dei sistemi alimentari può svolgere un ruolo significativo. Lo abbiamo visto anche durante il ciclo di 3 seminari organizzati dalla Santa Sede nelle 2 ultime settimane su cibo per la vita, giustizia alimentare, cibo per tutti. Non è compito facile trarre delle conclusioni dopo 3 giornate così intense, dove è emerso chiaramente come questo processo riguardante i sistemi alimentari debba essere orientato affinché essi siano in grado di aumentare la resilienza, rafforzare le economie locali, migliorare la nutrizione, ridurre lo spreco alimentare, fornire diete sane e accessibili a tutti, essere sostenibili dal punto di vista ambientale e rispettose delle culture locali. Si tratta di obiettivi complessi, il cui conseguimento è collegato alla consapevolezza che, come afferma uno dei principali messaggi dell'enciclica Laudato Si, tutto è in relazione, tutto è connesso. Proviamo dunque a tracciare non tanto delle conclusioni di questo ciclo di seminari, ma dei punti di orientamento che vogliono anche rappresentare un contributo della Santa Sede a questo processo verso il Summit delle Nazioni Unite sui sistemi alimentari. Un primo punto di orientamento, più volte citato negli interventi che abbiamo sentito, è il bisogno di adottare una nuova visione del mondo, fondata sul concetto centrale della Laudato Si, l'ecologia integrale. È un concetto complesso e multidimensionale che adotta un'ottica di lungo periodo volto a riconoscere la necessità di cercare soluzioni integrali che considerino le interazioni dei sistemi naturali tra loro e con i sistemi sociali. Papa Francesco usa spesso l'immagine efficace del poliedro che ha molte facce, moltissimi lati, ma tutti compongono un'unità ricca di sfumature, perché il tutto è superiore alla parte. L'ecologia integrale ruota attorno a 2 concetti chiave: la centralità della persona umana e la necessità di incoraggiare la cultura della cura che costituisce la via privilegiata per la protezione dell'ambiente umano e naturale e per la costruzione della pace. Ecco dunque un secondo punto per orientare la trasformazione dei sistemi alimentari, il rispetto della dignità umana. Misure concrete per porre fine alla fame e alla malnutrizione, ossia gli obiettivi principali dei sistemi alimentari, devono sempre rispettare la dignità umana e il riconoscimento del diritto di ogni persona a essere libera dalla povertà, dalla fame e dalla malnutrizione. Poiché nel mondo attuale vi è cibo in quantità sufficiente per tutti, ma non tutti possono usufruirne, l'insicurezza alimentare non è collegata all'aspetto demografico della quantità di persone, ma ad elementi più qualitativi come l'accesso a cibo nutriente e sicuro e la sua distribuzione, la diffusione di corrette informazioni, il supporto a chi si trova in situazioni di vulnerabilità. Un invito dunque a ripensare e rinnovare i nostri sistemi alimentari in una prospettiva non solo sostenibile, resiliente e inclusiva, ma anche solidale, superando la logica dello sfruttamento selvaggio del creato e orientando meglio il nostro impegno a coltivare e custodire l'ambiente e le sue risorse, per garantire la sicurezza alimentare e per camminare verso una nutrizione sufficiente e sana per tutti. In quest'ottica, e qui possiamo mettere in evidenza il terzo punto di orientamento, è importante recuperare la centralità del settore agricolo da cui dipende il soddisfacimento di molti bisogni umani fondamentali. È quanto mai urgente che nel processo decisionale politico ed economico, volto a delineare la cornice del processo di ripartenza che si sta costruendo, il settore agricolo riacquisisca un ruolo prioritario. Se grazie a questo processo di trasformazione dei sistemi alimentari si riesce a conferire all'agricoltura una funzione primaria, in tale processo i piccoli agricoltori e le famiglie agricole dovrebbero essere considerati attori privilegiati, non dovrebbero essere considerati invisibili. Le loro conoscenze tradizionali non devono essere trascurate o ignorate, mentre il loro coinvolgimento diretto consente di comprendere meglio le priorità e le esigenze reali. La testimonianza di oggi di Fratel Mussi ce l'ha dimostrato. Favorire l'accesso dei piccoli agricoltori ai servizi necessari per la produzione, la commercializzazione e l'utilizzo delle risorse agricole è ora obbligatorio. Le comunità interessate dovrebbero anche essere in grado di gestire direttamente le misure necessarie e assumere il proprio livello di responsabilità e le conseguenti azioni. La risposta sta quindi nel potenziamento del rafforzamento delle capacità dei piccoli agricoltori e dell'agricoltura familiare. D'altronde la famiglia è una componente essenziale dei sistemi alimentari, perché nell'ambito familiare si impara a godere dei frutti della terra senza abusarne e si scoprono gli strumenti migliori per diffondere stili di vita rispettosi del bene personale e collettivo. Questo riconoscimento dell'importanza della famiglia deve inoltre essere accompagnato da politiche e iniziative che soddisfino pienamente le esigenze delle donne rurali, incoraggino l'occupazione dei giovani e valorizzino il lavoro degli agricoltori nelle zone più povere e remote. Riconoscere questo processo di trasformazione dei sistemi alimentari, il fondamentale rispetto della dignità della persona umana, il primato del settore agricolo e la centralità dei piccoli agricoltori e dell'agricoltura familiare permette di rafforzare gli stessi sistemi alimentari come potenziale strumento di risoluzione dei conflitti. Numerosi conflitti ruotano attorno ai sistemi alimentari. come abbiamo visto oggi negli interventi precedenti. Molti di essi sono dovuti al confronto di interessi diffusi di imprenditori e politici locali, come di grandi interessi di aziende multinazionali e di enormi interessi internazionali. Tutto ciò, se rende ingenti e più rapidi la produzione e lo scambio, è carico di responsabilità nei confronti dei singoli agricoltori, delle popolazioni interessate e del loro ambiente, di paesi i cui assetti economici e sociali ne sono fortemente influenzati. Affrontare efficacemente e con rinnovata responsabilità etica tali conflitti significa non risparmiare alcuno sforzo nel promuovere il dialogo, così come per favorire un cambio di mentalità, un'agricoltura condotta in modo umano e realmente e moralmente sostenibile. Ciò mette in evidenza un quarto punto di orientamento: fondare il processo di gestione dei sistemi alimentari su un processo di educazione che verta su una necessaria transizione dalla cultura dello scarto e dello spreco alla cultura della cura. Questa transizione richiede un dialogo interdisciplinare. La scienza e la tecnologia sono necessarie per nutrire le persone e per migliorare i sistemi alimentari, ma non sono da sole sufficienti per raggiungere traguardi importanti come quelli dell'eradicazione della fame, contenuti nel secondo obiettivo per lo sviluppo sostenibile e per rispondere al mandato di custodire e coltivare il creato. Le scienze devono essere guidate e orientate dai principi etici, fondati sulla natura umana in tutta la sua ricchezza. Non si può più prescindere da un innovativo modello scientifico e istituzionale fondato sulla condivisione delle conoscenze e sulla cooperazione tra le diverse discipline, finalizzato a costruire il quadro etico entro il quale costruire la responsabilizzazione di ognuno di noi con le diverse competenze e grazie al quale il sistema economico possa migliorare, non distruggere il nostro mondo. Questa è una citazione da Papa Francesco, la Laudato Si. Anche come risposta ai vari conflitti ai quali i sistemi alimentari devono rispondere nell'ambito del processo della loro trasformazione, possono essere dunque utili i 4 punti di orientamento: la visione dell'ecologia integrale, il punto fermo della dignità della persona umana, la centralità dei piccoli agricoltori e delle famiglie rurali, la lente della cultura della cura. La pandemia ci ha fatto sperimentare che l'incertezza e la fragilità sono dimensioni costitutive della condizione umana che riguardano tutti. Occorre rispettare questo limite e tenerlo presente in ogni progetto di sviluppo, prendendosi cura delle vulnerabilità altrui. Papa Francesco individua nella capacità di amare la via maestra che garantisce la sicurezza alimentare e la sicurezza umana nella sua totalità. Cito a questo riguardo le sue parole: l'amore ispira la giustizia ed è essenziale per realizzare un giusto ordine sociale tra realtà diverse che vogliono correre il rischio dell'incontro reciproco. Amare vuol dire contribuire affinché ogni paese aumenti la produzione e giunga all'autosufficienza alimentare. Amare si traduce nel pensare nuovi modelli di sviluppo e di consumo e nell'adottare politiche che non aggravino la situazione delle popolazioni meno avanzate o la loro dipendenza esterna. Amare significa non continuare a dividere la famiglia umana tra chi ha il superfluo e chi manca del necessario. Orientata da questa bussola, è imprescindibile che la comunità internazionale lavori affinché il summit non rimanga un'iniziativa soltanto celebrativa, ma incida effettivamente sulla vita delle generazioni attuali e future. Grazie.
Grazie Eminenza per la sua riflessione. Grazie alla dottoressa Di Giovanni per avergli prestato voce. Grazie per questo sguardo, direi proprio amorevole anche a dove nascono i sistemi alimentari, cioè dall'uomo, che deve esserne sempre al centro perché si possano nutrire le persone e non i conflitti. E ringrazio tutti i contributor di oggi, tutti coloro che hanno parlato, ringrazio coloro che ci hanno seguito e che hanno prestato la loro attenzione, la loro riflessione e che ci hanno anche interpellato nel corso di queste 2 ore. E ringrazio chi è qui in sala e chiaramente ringrazio con ancora maggiore affetto, perché bisogna superare le distanze, coloro che sono con noi virtualmente in diverse parti del mondo. Grazie ancora a tutti quanti.